This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
We are the gods, trapped in cocoons.
Rose.
I don't know where they are.
Rose? Rose! Rose, give me those keys! Rose, give me those keys. Rose, now! Now, the keys!
Oh, be careful, bro.
What the fuck?
I didn't do anything.
What the fuck is going on?
Where are those keys, Rose?
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
Hello and welcome to Time Sensitive, a film podcast exploring the best under-the-radar movies from the past 18 months. I just want to point out I find that key scene of Get Out to be particularly disturbing in a very disturbing movie, especially Allison Williams' little turn as soon as she's like, I can't give you the keys, right, babe? That part is terrifying to me. I'm Ian, and I'm here as always with my friends in film, Sam and Kate. Say hello.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome. We are in the web of our Freaky Film Festival, our second annual month-long celebration of all things horror and all things under the radar.
You're joining us for a very special episode because not only are we going to review Xavier Bergen's documentary Horror Noire, A History of Black Horror, but we also have a guest with us. Highly unusual. I know. Real freaking out. For only the second time in time-sensitive history, we're welcoming a fourth voice to our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, warlocks and witches. I'm not saying that.
Yes, you are.
For only the second time in time-sensitive history, we are welcoming a fourth voice to our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome local documentarian and friend of the show, Dom Damron.
Hey, welcome, Dom.
Hey, how's it going?
We're very happy to have you with us.
For sure.
So happy you're here. Dom, Ian, and I met you when all three of us participated in a web series called Sunday Brunch Conversations, hosted by our friend, Kaylin Williams. We'll actually put the link of that in the description of this, just so if you want to check that out as well. That particular episode was centered around race in film, television, and culture. We found you hilarious, which is totally true here. You were awesome. We really enjoyed. You gave us so many different things to kind of listen to, dropping a bunch of names and stuff. But Kate introduced you to us. Can you tell us how you guys met?
I think like most normal people in a bar.
Yeah.
The classic story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Through because I work at the Meanwhile.
Okay.
So I think it was just serving
You're serving.
Hunter and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Dom first piqued my interest. We started talking about movies, and I told him about the podcast and said we were reviewing Leave No Trace. And before it even left my mouth, he was like, "Oh, Deb Granick," and I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" And I was like, "Oh, this guy knows movies."
But it's also really cool when you hear somebody else that loves movies as well. I think that there's that mutual thing. Once I heard that you had a podcast that you were actually dedicating time to reviewing films, my mind was blown because Grandpa's has a really short attention span for anything that they're interested in. So the fact that you guys are dedicated and talking about film, I was like, holy shit, I'm very into that.
There is almost a high that you get when someone else talks movies the way that you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I totally can see this initial conversation the two of you had taking place in the bar. I can just see it.
Yeah.
I wish we would have filmed it.
Yeah.
Let's go to the clip.
I wish we had it, yeah.
Yeah, my eyes sparkle every time somebody suggests a movie to me that's not a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
I'm super pumped about it.
If someone else in a conversation mentioned Deb Granick to me, I think I would just collapse.
Right? And
Yeah.
you guys know me and Winter's Bone, so I was like, oh, yeah.
Awesome. So, Dom, could you tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and some of the movies that you might have put together and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I'm not really. It's hard to kind of define myself in an official context when it comes to film. I do a lot of different things. Currently, I work with GRTV and Wealthy Theater, so helping film concerts and stuff like that. I've done a documentary. I've done a couple, I guess, short film series or not,
Dom
questioning
TV.
people. Yeah, Dom TV, exactly. It was literally called the Random Question Show, so that's exactly
I love it.
what I was talking about. But really, I'm just interested in all things having to do with theatrics and photography. Those two aspects of film. I mean, I love it. Drama. So I've always found my way into some sort of scene, whether that's volunteering at Civic, whether that's volunteering at WYCE or GRTV, whether that's getting out there on my own and just making my own shit.
Tell us more about the documentary that you mentioned.
Yeah, it was called Do It Together. So, as a play on do it yourself, unity. And it was focused on the last year, we didn't know it at the time, but the last year of Lamplight Music Festival, where they went public, Lamplight being a traditionally a music festival traditionally held in houses. They went to the public venues this time. So I got to kind of chronicle that, and that was really awesome. And I mean, that was my first time. That was my first time ever editing a long form piece of work. So that was really cool. But the feedback that I got was really amazing, and just the kind of things I got to put in a time capsule was really interesting. I just watched it the other day, and it's like, damn, that feels like years ago, which is distressing as a balding male, but it is what it is.
And you served as director, producer, writer.
I literally
cinematographer.
did. I mean, so I had two really dope ass camera people with me, Sam Bushy and Sarah Bushy, who are both brothers and sister. And then I had help in various like with various editing things from people at GRTV, but I did most of the editing myself, which was my first time ever editing anything like that long. It was crazy because we started out with I pared down 10 or 12 hours worth of footage and just kind of having no real direction in the film whatsoever other than just point it at things and shit. So it really, really was my first film. And there's a lot of errors in it, but also I am really proud of it. It was a really cool effort.
It's because it's really good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Where can you watch it?
Thanks. It's on YouTube. Thanks. That was cool. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on my channel. And you can look up the Random Question Show as well. That was just that short form series where we go outside of bars and talk to people, where that's the best place where I feel like you should talk to people. Yeah. I think mainly I was mentioned as a documentarian. That's my main interest, is to really make documentaries. I love the element of truth in it, and that you can only use aesthetics so much. You have you can't really negotiate with the narrative. You know what I mean? You can't rewrite a scene. As it happens is how it happens. So I think that's really my form, although I'm working on my first long form screenplay.
Okay.
Now, so
what kind of documentaries are you attracted to? Are there any particular titles that stand out that have shaped your style, or any kind of inspirations that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. My two favorite documentaries, and the two most integral documentaries, I guess, to how I see three of them, to how I see how to do the form. Harlan County, USA, by Barbara Koppel. Barbara Koppel is amazing. When you to me, when I think about documentaries, I'm like, doing a documentary is about immersion as a journalist, and taking this heavy, so now equipment is somewhat lighter, but it's still a pain in the ass. If you're like a professional, the amount of things that you're going to want to bring with you, it sucks. It's like when I was walking around doing the Lamplight movie, I was carrying around this tripod. I was being a huge inconvenience to all these people, pushing them around. I have this huge light. It's a lot. Back then, when Barbara Koppel was covering a strike in coal mine, Virginia or whatever, she had no Steadicam, no nothing, but she was in the middle of all these different things that were happening. So that was a really important documentary to me. And then, dang, I don't know why I'm blanking on the name because I'm nervous. But it is A Day in the Life of Crime, and it is by John Alpert, and he also did Baghdad ER. And again, the most important element to me is immersion. It doesn't really matter about, how clean the shots are, or, right now we're in the era of the true crime documentary. So you always have these beautifully lit, set up confessional shots. I hate that shit. I just want to follow the story as it's happening. Not that I don't love Ken Burns, because I get hard for Ken Burns. I love Ken Burns so much.
How can you not? Like, it's
everyone gets hard for Ken Burns.
Yeah. Ken Burns, he's so cool. But like, I love John Alper because this is A Day in the Life of Crime was before, it was like when HBO was like brand new.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And this documentary, before I guess documentary ethics was really in play, he's following around these two people who are like addicts in New York, but they also have families, and like they make their life off of like a kleptocracy, basically. Like they go around stealing shit all day, And it's just this really, like, it's before Vice. It's before all of the gotcha and like, sensationalist journalism that kind of diluted it and just made you seem like, okay, you're just doing this to get attention. Like, this guy was doing it for the care of the people involved, ask them real questions. And so he did that again. He was like one of the first people to go and film in Iraq at a hospital, at a medic station in like Baghdad in 2003. And like, you're watching this documentary that's on Amazon Prime 2, Baghdad ER. And like literally like a bomb just goes off next to the camera. It's like, I mean, I don't know what I'm chasing, but I'm like, I would love to find subjects like that and like be so connected to your story that you're willing to put yourself in these ultra sketchy situations to do it. It's something that I really find admirable. So.
And are you finding a narrative feature, writing your first feature-length screenplay, is that a more difficult process? Is it different challenges altogether?
It's totally different challenges. I'm like a really distracted human being. So that's one of the things. Also, so I like heard this kind of discouraging thing from Alfonso Cuarón, and it was in a panel, and he was saying like, he was like, if you don't write the screenplay in 2 weeks, it's never going to happen.
Oh, God.
I was like, what?
That's
what are
so
you
much
talking
pressure.
about? Yeah.
Says the
And
guy
I was-
with 4 Academy Awards.
Yeah, I was like, of course you would say that. Like, you just made Roma, you stupid genius. You know what I'm saying? Like, but like for me, like my mind really wanders, but I also like movies like that. Like I like movies with lots of detail and fully realized worlds. And I like Linklater. Like Linklater is who I strive to kind of
Kate's
get
fist
my
pumping.
vibe like, because he's just like, you feel like you've lived the life with them. You know what I mean? And so
In most cases, literally.
Yeah, sometimes.
yeah, and I love that. Like, the Before trilogy, like you're getting to know these people through walks and conversations. I like that. So I've been just like, a lot of post-its, a lot of notes, a lot of random notes.
That's
really
very
trying to,
Linklater too. He's like napkins stapled to papers in order of like all over the place.
My room looks like a conspiracy theorist
Yeah.
because it's just all these different, they like milkshakes and all sorts of stuff like that. But like, yeah, I'm just really trying to figure out the characters. I think that's the thing. When you're doing it outside of an institution or outside of an official process, you have so much leeway that you're willing to give yourself, because my thing is, it's like nobody's paying me for it, so I want to make it as good as I want. You know what I mean? And as long as I can track my progress. But at the same time, it's hard to know, what should you let go? So yeah, it's a completely different thing. The thing that's toughest for me with making a documentary so far is just like, one, it's like you have to get started. So once you get started, then it becomes easier to take this very conspicuous equipment into public spaces and shove it into people's faces and say, But the initial first couple of days of that is like very distressing for me personally, because I'm just like, I'm bothering everybody.
Yeah, you're waiting for someone to be like, can you get the fuck out of my face?
Or you're like you're so shy because you can't be shy. Otherwise you look like a voyeur. So it's like, don't, you know what I mean? You have to be like up here with it.
Right.
But I've also gotten a lot more experience just like filming in general in between then. So it's become a lot more comfortable.
See, I was really afraid this was going to happen where you were going to start talking and we were going to get so enthralled with what you were saying that we weren't going to be able to get to the movie that we came to
I was trying to pare it down.
You did great.
No, I wish we could keep talking about that. And we'll come back to some more of those projects that you talk about. Thank you for sharing that, though.
Yeah, we'll have you back on the show in 2 weeks, full script, ready for its first table read.
As long as it's a Zoom and I get unlimited bottles of water, I'm in.
Okay, so I picked this one. I was up. I saw this on a list somewhere a long time ago. I don't know.
You've been mentioning it for at least 6 months.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
I maybe I saw it when we were doing our 2019 wrap up or something. I was kind of like taking stock of what I had seen that year and came across this on just like films that came out in 2019 and was like, this sounds like a great documentary for our lineup, something I want to have in our canon for sure. So we kind of like tucked it away and said like, okay, Freaky Film Festival, like it's not gonna be October for 6 months, but we'll figure out a place to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this just felt like an awesome documentary. It's not a genre we've ever reviewed or dabbled in or talked about. Like I knew we were all going to be beginners, and so it felt like a cool educational moment to walk into something that we had no idea about it.
And why not bring a documentarian to talk to about it with us?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like our viewers can also have a lot to learn from something really cool like this. Again, it's just like boosting something we want people to not forget.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the whole
And I'm so excited that hopefully we get a few more people to watch this movie just from our conversation on it today. As Kate mentioned way earlier, this is the second time we've welcomed a guest to Time Sensitive. The first time was way back in episode 31 of our podcast when we had the opportunity to sit down with Emily Lokes, Director of Community Affairs and heiress to the Celebration Cinema empire.
She is.
Yeah.
It literally is. Her grandfather was a legend.
And for those that aren't in West Michigan, it's a local theater chain that we have right here in our area.
Yeah, we interviewed her about growing up as a member of the first family of film in Grand Rapids, discussed the impact of streaming platforms on movie distribution, her favorite theater snacks, and her love of Peanut Butter Falcon, which was really fun.
Yes.
Scroll back in our catalog to find that great interview. It's called On the Clock with Emily Lokes.
I'd be super curious to sit down with her right now because Celebration is only opening up for the first time, as of this taping, I think next week or this week, for the first time in 7 months. I'd be really...
What are they even going to show?
It's going to be like Tenet on every single screen.
Yeah.
And they're only going to have like 2 screens.
Yeah.
I would love to sit down with her again and find out if she thinks that there's even a future for the film industry anymore. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about this.
There's no way she has time for us. There's got to be chaos over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you imagine?
I'll give her a call. We'll see.
Yeah,
I mean,
we'll
we're
see.
on speed dial with her now.
We'll see what we can do. This is also our first non-solo subject documentary covered on Time Sensitive. We previously reviewed Love Gilda about SNL star Gilda Radner, and Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan concert doc by Martin Scorsese. Fuck that damn movie. I still hate it.
That movie was hilarious.
Dom,
I'm
have you seen
still
Rolling
mad
Thunder
about
Review?
it.
Yeah, I'm like wondering why you're mad about it. I'm curious about that. What's up?
Well, let me explain.
go for it,
Sam
Ian.
pulled an Ian and totally didn't realize that half of it was fake. So when he sat down to talk with us about it, he was surprised to learn that Sharon Stone really wasn't a groupie for Bob Dylan in her late teens.
I thought it was. I was so mad because I went into it thinking it was a legit documentary. I didn't know half of the movie was bullshit.
Well, and it was just concert films in general we were unfamiliar with, and then to add this whole other element of it being somewhat facetious was a whole other element that blew Sam off.
I saw No Direction Home. Never mind. I saw No Direction Home. That was the
okay.
other one. Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't
Right,
seen
right,
this
right.
one.
He's
That's
a
the
fan.
true one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fan.
Yeah, they
I
lied.
saw I'm Not There. That's a good one though. Or not? That's the same one.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a narrative feature with which a bunch of different people playing Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Which was,
Same
I mean,
one.
Sam didn't realize that Bob Dylan was actually a woman.
No, that one I would have figured out. Yeah.
So you just didn't like the mix of genre.
Yeah, I didn't like that it played itself off as a legitimate documentary when half of the things that they were telling you throughout this movie was a lie.
We're fictitious.
The wool was pulled
Because
over his eyes.
I didn't know a ton about Bob Dylan going into it, and to be tricked into thinking I'm seeing something that's totally factual.
I think that's a legitimate gripe. However,
Yeah.
Sounds like that's
knowing
bullshit.
the nation,
Smash
knowing the
it.
nature of Bob Dylan, though, which would be important, I believe, in watching the Bob Dylan
For sure, yeah.
documentary. That's
Yeah.
who he is.
Yeah.
He's the trickster.
He's a trickster. He's a trickster.
You're totally right. And if you guys want to hear me get even more mad about this movie,
You should see how they
go
felt
back
when
to
he
our
went
old
electric.
I'm just glad that we
That too,
now
yeah.
have a third person to make fun of Sam for that. But all of that aside, Dom is here at the table with us, and we want to talk about a very, very under the radar and entertainingly informative documentary titled Horror Noire: A History of Black Horror. Take a listen.
We've always loved horror. It's just that horror hasn't always loved us.
Black people play a particular role in horror films.
First, we weren't in it. We were played by white people.
Yeah.
We went from maids to pimps and hoes.
If there was somebody black, they would be the first to die.
Black films hold a mirror up to society, but at the same time give an audience an escape.
My name is Blackula.
One fellow said to me, you were directing before it was legal.
You can be the boss down there. I'm boss up here.
Yes, that's history.
We've shifted from being the focal point of the fear to being the heroes.
This would be unheard of 25 years ago.
If we can use what we've experienced, we can tell stories that people have never seen before.
Horror Noire is directed by Emmy-nominated director Xavier Bergen and co-written by Ashley Blackwell and Danielle Burrows, based on the book Horror Noire: Blacks in American Horror Films from the 1890s to Present by Texas A&M Vice President, Associate Provost, and Professor Robin R. Means Coleman. According to Dr. Means Coleman, for most of the 20th century, American horror films had predominantly white casts and audiences. Minorities were often subject to tokenism, being frequently cast as supporting characters rather than main characters, or as violent characters or villains. This documentary is framed by genre actors and directors seated in a movie theater, discussing not only their roles in iconic horror films, but the genre in its historical context and their relationship to black representation in Hollywood in general. So Talking Heads is the format that they're using here, but the actual features include Candyman himself, Tony Todd, Blackula director William Crane, actress Loretta Devine, and the reigning king, Jordan Peele. And clocking in at a brisk 1 hour and 23 minutes, Horror Noire is the first documentary distributed by Shudder, a streaming service dedicated to horror, thriller, and sci-fi movies. The film hit the platform back in February of 2019, and even though this is technically outside of our traditional 18-month release window, we couldn't miss the opportunity, as Kate mentioned earlier, to cover it this year in our Freaky Film Festival.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it is. I also just wanted to note that with this documentary, we're working with source material from a female author, 2 female writers of the doc, 2 female producers, and so many female horror experts and actresses and directors weighing in. It was really cool to see this because I feel like historically horror is definitely marketed as a very masculine genre. And then it was even cooler to see these really fabulous black women weighing in about the intersectionality of not only being a woman in horror, but being a black woman in horror. So
young and old.
Yeah, true.
And
too. Spanning
Yeah.
age for sure. Yeah. So that was really, really cool to see them kind of like taking back that space to talk about their experience in it.
This is your spoiler alert. If you have not seen Horror Noire, you can pause this episode and stream the doc for free on Shudder or Amazon Prime.
We need to get Dom to record these.
Yeah.
That was perfect.
That sounded great. According to a statement by Shudder, police brutality and systemic racism are horrors that must end now. As was common practice this past summer, Shudder made Horror Noire available for free in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and in memory of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
So there's no excuse not to go and find this movie.
Yeah.
Available to watch.
You can find it for
Hour
free.
and 23 minutes.
Yeah, it just moves really fast.
So worth the time.
Here's your plot summary, but again, full spoilers. Watch it if you can. Delving into a century of genre films that utilized, caricatured, exploited, sidelined, and finally embraced them, Horror Noire traces the untold history of Black Americans in Hollywood through their connection to the horror genre. Presenting the living and the dead, Horror Noire uses new and archival interviews from scholars and creators, elevating the voices who survived the genre's past trends and those shaping its future. Basically, you're getting a history lesson of black horror film as told by those who made it.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Straightforward.
Yeah. So our first segment is always first impressions. What were you thinking as the credits rolled? Walking into this conversation, how are we feeling? Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I was surprised it was over.
Yeah.
Like it was so fast. I wanted more of it. I feel like it covered so many different things, but it did it so quickly that I think there's some more stories hidden under there that I really want to hear about and want to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
It also felt, because it was bookended by Get Out, it felt like a little bit of an advertisement just for Get Out.
Yeah.
Like everything around the meat of this documentary felt like, yeah, Get Out's great. We all know that. So here's the movie telling you that it's
It felt
great.
like maybe a lot of the checks were signed like J. Peel for this documentary, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Kate, what about you?
Oh, yeah. I felt similarly. There were a lot of things I wanted to know more about, but then I kind of weighed that out of like, if a documentary leaves you wanting to learn more about that subject, hasn't it really accomplished?
That's successful, yeah.
That's success there. But again, this was really snappy. It acts as a really like entertaining primer to black horror. It's set up in a very linear, educational, like your teacher would wheel in the TV to learn about this thing, and it did it in an hour and 20 minutes. It moves by decade rather than by project, which is cool, a cool way to break it down. But yeah, it's really digestible. You learn a lot. You walk away with a list of things that you want to watch if you're not familiar with black horror. And that's how I felt.
I have to agree with you totally. If I was going to be a teacher,
Mhm.
this is how I'd want to teach this subject. And if I was a student, this is how I'd want to get that information delivered to me.
Yeah.
Everything was very concise.
It's a nice, neat package.
It was.
Mhm.
It was wrapped with a perfect bow. And I'm currently reading this book called Hollywood Black, The Stars, the Films, the Filmmakers. It's by another professor, Donald Bogle. And this documentary brought that book to life because the book is full of pictures, and it's cool to get this history of all these people that have contributed to an entire genre of film, but then to have it in a compact 1 hour and 20-minute version where I actually get to see the moving images rather than just the still images, it exploded.
Mhm.
So it both of these together as companions to one another were great partners in that. And there was just enough time devoted to each era that I felt like I got enough, but I wasn't overwhelmed. And it was a great translation of these PhDs talking about these subjects, and then people in the film industry too. There was a great balance between industry experts, people who participated, and then academics.
Mhm.
It never once felt like I was being talked down to, or that there was some sort of thing that I was not privy to as someone who was stepping into this for the first time.
Mhm.
So I felt very comfortable around it.
Cool. Dom, first impressions?
I felt like so hearing from all the academics was really, really nice because it really fleshed out the subject for me. One of the things that I felt in the beginning of watching the movie was that, and we kind of talked about this in the car, was how subjective the genre of horror is. There's like a lot more, I think, widely agreed concepts of like romance or comedy. Two things that are like pretty reflexive, right? But like what you find horrifying, horror, think about that, like horrifying. That's like pretty intuitive to who you are, as a person. So like a lot of the movies up there, I was like, yeah, none of this shit is scary to me. Like I just like I remember being afraid of Candyman when I was younger and stuff like that. And I love seeing like Tony Todd and Ernest Dickinson just because he's like been all over television and directing other stuff. Bill Gunn was like a cool person to see in there, all these different people. But like, and one of the things I would point out in the movie was that like, in general, not just for, African Americans, but in general, like, reality tends to be more horrifying than
Right.
any of the things that can be brought up in here. Like, honestly, one of the scariest movies to me is like The Conversation or something like that, like where it's like, who's listening in my walls? You know what I'm saying? Like that to me is like the more of the paranoia I'm about. A lot of things in horror have to do with like spiritual type of stuff and stuff like that. So I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really, I don't really get it. But I did like seeing just kind of the history laid out, and also anything with Keith David in it. Because man, like,
Yes.
dude, I love that dude, man. Like, okay, so that's the thing. Like, the scariest thing that he's ever done was like nothing that was recapped in the movie. You guys remember Requiem for a Dream when he's like,
No.
I didn't pull it out for air. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was like the coolest thing. I mean, not the coolest. That was fucked up. But still, it was really like, that's the most intensely like, scary thing that I've ever seen Keith David do. You know what I mean?
I imagine he was like, I'm going to talk about this at this point. And they were like, no, you cannot.
I was just like, I was thinking it was the ass line, but I was like, he didn't say that. He just facilitated that party.
Oh, God.
You make a great point because we've been talking just in this year's Freaky Film Festival about how some of the movies that we've been picking might not be considered horror by some. Sam had friends that didn't think Midsommar was that scary.
It wasn't.
And well, to Kate and I, it's the most terrifying thing we've
Yeah.
ever seen. But again, I think that's shaped by what your experiences are in life. It's shaped by what you perceive to be reality.
Highly personal, yeah.
It's you're exactly right. It's a very personal medium. But before we get into the more detailed pieces of this movie, I want to kind of, this was an idea Kate had, was to let's kind of take stock of where we were before we started watching, because I feel like from a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being you knew nothing about the genre at all, and 10 you could have been interviewed for this documentary. Where do you think you landed on that spectrum? Sam?
Oh, start with me. I don't know. I'd probably say like a 4 or a 5.
Okay.
On my spectrum, I knew most of the movies that they talked about going into this outside of the time frame of blaxploitation.
Okay.
I didn't know any of those movies that they were talking about there, but some of the early ones I was aware of, and then like from the 90s on, I was aware of those ones as well.
Ian?
Yeah, I would say two. I like Sam, I knew the titles and that they mentioned, but I didn't know anything beyond the title.
Yeah.
I had seen it referenced somewhere. I recognized the faces, but I could not put them to a project. So I definitely felt under prepared watching it. But like I said, in terms of a teaching lesson, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
What about you, Kate?
I would say like a 1. I feel like if you would have asked me about black horror, I probably would have been able to tell you like Dwayne Johnson was a really important character in Night of the Living Dead, or like, Candyman was really iconic, but that's because it was like a crossover hit, not because I knew anything about black horror. It was just like popular in the 90s.
And you're afraid of almost all horror movies.
And yeah, I just am like not a horror person at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay.
Did you know a lot about black horror walking into this?
Shit, I knew nothing. I knew absolutely. I was gonna put myself at like a 0.5, honestly, because like I don't watch horror movies like
Me either.
whatsoever. And then also, again, like just hearing from all the talking heads, and especially on the academic side of things, that was like really cool to just get that context. Anytime you're around a film historian, they gotta tell you something that you don't know. So it was really cool just to kind of get it all laid out in a timeline. So yeah, I don't think I would have been like, oh yeah, I was I probably would have been sitting behind somebody or whatever, just kind of being, I don't know, like this, just like that.
So, Ian, you've mentioned a few people that we get to see in this. Do we want to mention some of the other like heavy hitters we get to talk to or hear from?
Of course. I think it's Dom just mentioned it perfectly. The academic side, we had these professors. Not only was Dr. Means Coleman interviewed, who's the original author of the text itself that this is adapted from. Tenerife Dune, who is a professor at UCLA, actually was the first person to come up with The Sunken Place, Racism, Survival, and the Black Horror Aesthetic. It's a class that film students at UCLA can take.
Right.
I remember that being in the news in 2018, shortly after Get Out had its huge run at the Oscars, that they had built this class around it. So to hear her sit and talk, she was one of the people that was by herself. She was not paired with anyone in a theater, but she was one of the most engaging people in the whole thing. I wrote down almost every line that she said because I just thought that she was extremely brilliant, and I would love to take a class with her. We already mentioned Tony Todd is in is interviewed. Ken Foray, Richard Lawson, Sam and Dom already mentioned Keith David and Ernest Dickerson. Rachel True was someone that I didn't know, and I thought she had some of the best sound bites of the whole movie.
She was really engaging. She was just very like warm and nice to listen to. Yeah.
And she had a really interesting perspective because she was one of the younger females interviewed, but she was also in basically what appeared, the movie's called The Craft, but it basically appeared to be like Clueless, but the horror version. I mean, this is from not watching it, so I don't know the details of it, but her perspective as the sole black character in that movie, in the context of this history of black horror, was really, really interesting, especially as a young actress and someone that got to sit and talk amongst these giants of the industry. I just thought that her perspective alone was interesting to listen to. I would have loved to just hear her B-roll, just her talking about where she's been and what she's been doing. And then there were plenty others. Loretta Devine, that's a face that I recognized, but more so from her work on Grey's Anatomy. Even though I don't watch that show, I know her from that. So anyone else that stood out that I'm missing?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
No. there were a few other faces that I recognized, but I for the life of me I can't remember the names.
Yeah.
Interesting question posed. Anyone you would have put into this for this conversation? Actors, directors?
I have a couple that I would really have liked to hear, or would have liked to hear from for this, because we did have the director of Bones in talking about that, and it got a very small snippet of time in there. But I would have loved to hear from Snoop Dogg on what it was like to be kind of the main character of a horror movie. And also, this one didn't get mentioned at all, and I was kind of surprised it didn't get mentioned. But Wesley Snipes as Blade, which is a main character. You're moving your head a little bit.
Horror is subjective.
Yeah, it maybe not considered technically a horror movie, which I totally get, but there's vampires in it, so we have one element that would be considered part of the horror genre. But to have a main character like that who is really there just kicking ass for the entirety of a movie, I feel like it would have been interesting to hear from him.
I would put Whoopi in it just because I never thought of Ghost as something that would fit in this movie, and that she's covered in it.
Oh shit!
No, like I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying
cut to her a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean she as a reference to the stereotype of the magical black woman in this movie. I didn't think that I would have ever expected that to be that way. So, and I heard another thing mentioned about Michael Clark Duncan kind of playing the same kind of role in the Green Mile.
Wait, he comes in this too?
He's not in the movie, but it, like, her inclusion of that section made me think, like, okay, how many other movies have this role that's played? That
Sure, of like the mystic.
Yes, but that is a stereotype based on the horror genre that built that stereotype for characters. I also would love She's Alive, She's Sexy, Pam Grier. Put her in the movie.
Oh, absolutely.
Why was everyone but her in this movie?
Yeah, I couldn't believe she wasn't in the movie. I think she's amazing, and I would have liked to hear her side of the story.
Budget, yeah.
She's probably tired.
It's got to be part of it.
You know what I mean?
She's probably really tired.
So the movie, as Kate mentioned, goes through decade by decade. It starts very early 20th century. The first movie that they basically cover is The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffiths, one of the most famous early movies of all time. First movie to ever screen at the White House. They talk about that in Woodrow Wilson screening the movie and thinking it was great, and kind of initiates those decade segments by talking about the films within them and those tropes that are arisen from those various films. So with the early 20th century, we had white actors in blackface playing black characters, and it was a very awful depiction of black characters. Specifically, this started this subject of black male attraction to white women, and specifically with character in The Birth of a Nation. And I loved how they said from the very onset, The Birth of a Nation shapes movies that we still see today, regardless of whether they're positive or negative depictions. They're still referencing The Birth of a Nation there, and it's the first and only source. This is what I thought was one of the interesting points that I believe Dr. Means Coleman made, was that if you were watching Birth of a Nation in the early 1900s, this could have been your first or only source of black imagery or black culture. And if you're using this parodied, satirical, and just downright wrong depiction of that, this lustful pursuit of black men to rape white women, that's your only shaping of that. You have now transformed an entire generation of people until they get more access to other stories, or until those stories become accessible. So we kick off there, and then it goes into the films of Oscar Micheaux, right, Kate?
Yeah, so the flip side of that, Oscar Micheaux, a black director who really started working to counter those awful depictions with more like slice of life black characters in black movies. Writing and directing black films and showing what they called like successful black characters. So seeing black characters in various career spaces too, that was kind of
You'd
unheard
see them as
of.
like scientists.
Yeah,
and
in spaces they weren't being depicted or shown.
And they were all black cast too.
Yeah,
most of his films.
Yeah, exactly. So he was really changing the game at that time.
In the book that I'm reading that I mentioned earlier, there's a whole section on Michaud, and specifically his film Within Our Gates, which is from 1920, which the book describes as basically an outright flip from Birth of a Nation, in a almost like a response to that movie. Because in this one, we see from a black female protagonist, Evelyn Preer was the actress's name. We actually see a depicted attempted rape from an elderly white man on her from her perspective. So he's completely changing this whole narrative that was shaped and forged by Birth of a Nation that, again, still is a relevant viewpoint carried through movies into the 90s and even today, that this genre has been trying to counter its entire history.
Yeah. Did it just like blow your socks off when when Birth of a Nation was the first movie they were going to talk about? I was like, wow, here we fucking
I didn't expect that to be the starting point at all.
Yeah.
It did kind of blow me away.
Well, I think though, like one of the things that they pointed out was that the reality is a lot more frightening, or
right,
fear-inducing than like stories about vampires or werewolves or whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? So like, yeah, I would say that is, because not even necessarily just the movie itself, although, I mean, yes, like the story is well known to be like, horrifying and offensive, but like the kind of show of what the power of movies are, or what the power of film is. Because, at that time, like, we as a society did not really comprehend that. Like, Great Train Robbery, it was out, but like, this was like the first major full-length film that was edited with these techniques and had this, sort of poetry behind it, you know what I mean? And that's why it still stays resonant, because it is an artifact of the structure, along with, kind of the responsibilities of being a filmmaker and telling stories and introducing these into the public, because you're having like race riots and you're having the literal president endorse this thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's like almost a scarier thing about Birth of the Nation is like the reaction that it caused. And I mean, it being like a resurgence of the Klan, like, the
Klan was on its way out, but this movie kind of breathed new life into it.
Yeah.
And that's where we see the modern depictions of the KKK into the 50s and 60s in the South. Was this movie kind of regenerated a lot of that stigma and a lot of that representation. But from there, we move into the escapism eras of the 1930s and 1940s. So as America's at war, we're in the midst of the Great Depression. World War I is wrapped up. We then move into World War II. And we go from a depiction of blackface to no representation at all. And I think it's a number of the movie or the documentary discusses a number of different reasons for this, but a lot of it is because escapism in general, people are just trying to have fancy and fun and light. So a lot of the things we saw in movies were musicals or comedies, and there were major black musicals and comedies. King Vidor was a major filmmaker that brought all black cast. The movie Hallelujah came out in the early 1930s. So there was some representation, but on the horror side, not so much.
Yeah. This is also when you were just talking about Michaud's, what was the movie you referenced of his?
Within Our Gates.
Within Our Gates, we see like another flipping of a story with, they talk about Son of Ingagi and it being like a retelling of a really revolting picture called Ingagi that like depicts sexual violence against black women. And so again, we see like black writers and black directors kind of taking a story and being like, nope, this is fucked, and making a new one and putting out something way cooler.
And that movie, Son of Ingagi, is kind of considered the first black horror film by a lot of historians. It's written by Spencer Williams, who was Andy of the Amos and Andy TV series. And he was also a very prolific film director, but most notably known for the show, even though his contributions as a writer and as a director are innumerable within this black horror genre.
Yeah.
So then we move on to the 1950s and 60s. So this is where the documentary started getting into the atomic age, and the tropes start to change again. So we go from blackface to no representation at all to now experimentation in monster movies. And this was kind of one of the big eye-opening pieces for me to think that a movie like King Kong featured a lot of racist propaganda. I mean, I don't know if I ever thought of a movie like King Kong that way, or Creature of the Black Lagoon. I can't remember who was describing this, but the way the costumes of those creatures were designed mimicked a lot of the propaganda and
some of the
racial
stuff.
Utilizing like stereotypical like black features
Exactly.
on monsters. Yeah, that was really, really eye-opening. I don't think, just because I haven't watched those movies, I don't know a lot about it, but that was, I mean, those movies are iconic, quote unquote.
Yeah. Well, you think of like King Kong or Godzilla as these like non-human representations of terror, but then to see that they're actually rooted in
something else,
in racist ideology,
also, like, deceitfully crafted.
Yes, it that was a huge eye opener for me. And then there's this other element of this era of film that's a sad realism, where not only are in reality are blacks excluded from science and medicine, but now the movies are using them as props for experimentation. So not only are they not in these medical fields, but now movies are using them as scientific or sci-fi subjects, as things to experiment on. This reflects, the movie mentions the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and a number of other real life horrors that go back to Dom's earlier comments about how black history is basically black horror, and bringing those real elements into the movies.
Yeah, and I do remember them talking about during this period of time, since so much was science-based, that they the directors claimed that they couldn't find a place to put in black actors since they were all the people included were scientists.
Yeah.
So that's why we kind of went back to excluding black people from these horror movies, because their thought process was no one would believe this if a black person was a scientist operating or doing any of that kind of stuff. Stupid. Just made me mad.
Yeah, they go even further when they're explaining that too, of being like, servants weren't really cool to depict anymore, and black people can't be scientists, so we just like didn't really know what to do.
Right. Yeah.
And this is where the blaxploitation era of the 1970s really comes in, because those singular roles that were crafted for black actors, maids, you name it, that's what they did up into the 1960s. So then we have this era where there's no representation at all, and then I can't remember again who says it in the film, but we went from representations as servants and maids to pimps and hoes.
It was Keith David.
Keith David.
Okay.
That's all I
should have
say.
known. Yeah. And is this is Keith David's kind of introduction to film in itself is in the 70s and 80s, or was he earlier than that?
What does he say? His first film was The Thing.
The Thing. So
okay.
the 70s.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So he's the shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. John Carpenter.
Yeah.
We love John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of even leading into that, we had Night of the Living Dead, which they spent a lot of time talking about even before we got into this kind of blaxploitation era, where you had Dwayne Jones playing Ben and being a main character in a movie, taking control of a situation. There hadn't been any movies like that in existence, and you could tell by the faces of everyone talking about that movie how important Dwayne Jones's character was to every single one of these actors. It kind of blew me away how like in awe they were of this main character. And I actually spent some time and I watched it. Kate, did you watch it as well?
I watched it last year around Halloween.
Around Halloween. And I thought it was great.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. It's definitely of the era, so it is very slow. Some of the effects in it are better than I anticipated.
It's spooky.
For 1968.
For 1968, yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was cool too that like this is the first time we see that like being the black main character was not like the feature of the character. They were this director was like
he
just auditioned like really well.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of the film obviously took a different shape when you put a black man into that character. Like things kind of shifted around him. But that director was just like, wow, he was like really good.
George Romero, a visionary.
Oh yeah.
So the 70s and 80s brought us that blaxploitation era in cinema in general, but then blaxploitation influenced horror movies as well. So we had a crossover there, but we have the tropes of women in voodoo that kind of started, so women were kind of, Kate, as you mentioned at the very onset of our conversation, women were kind of excluded from the horror genre. Well, then let's bring them in, but they're going to be witches and they're going to be...
And super fucking hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like magical sex objects.
I think Pam Grier was in the second, she was in Scream Back to the Scream.
Yes.
So she was in the second movie.
Such a good title.
So good.
It was just, all these tropes that are brought forward really take root in the 70s and 80s. One of the ones that really surprised me, because I never thought of it this way either, so again, similar to Ghost and The Green Mile, was The Shining, and how Scatman Crothers is this just sacrificial character that's designed to advance the plot. There's no backstory to him. He's just there to be literally axed off to advance the storyline, but his only seemingly objective in the movie is to protect the unprotectable.
Did you know that character lives in the book? Did anyone know that?
I didn't know that. Yeah,
I did not.
I didn't know that either.
I've read the book. Yeah.
Okay.
And, it's a weird twist there.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't expecting it when I first saw The Shining. It is one of the most shocking deaths.
But it
in
also
cinema.
has like a little that movie does have a little racist to it, because I love that fucking movie for one.
Yeah.
But there is like the awkward bathroom scene where the guy's like, we have a nigger here, and he's like, a nigger, and they're just doing that like little back and forth and shit, and then he ends up killing off Scatman Crothers. I never really connected those two things.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that surprised me the most was the book itself. He's not dead, but Stephen King is kind of known for killing off black characters in a way that we see reflected in movies
Is that
a
a
lot.
Stephen King thing? I don't.
Well, it's like he does. Most of his lead characters are white, if not all of them.
Right.
And if there is a black character, they are a magical type, mystical person, like in Green Mile.
Okay.
And I was kind of thinking, like, would he be an interesting person to include in this conversation? And I was like, really, would you be going at him in a negative way to say, hey, all your characters are stereotypes? But from there, that's why I was so interested to see Stanley Kubrick take one character that's not killed off and then kill that character off.
Yeah.
Wait, so who has read the book?
I have.
Okay, is the Grady racist bathroom chat in the book?
Oh gosh, I can't remember. That was such a small scene.
Because they break it down and like there's a literal understanding. That's when you know that like Jack Nicholson is like racist for real in the movie. Because he's like, you know what I mean? And like they have this understanding. They don't really say anything else besides those words. They're like, I don't know. And and then like they go for it. It's crazy.
And I'm pretty sure in the older Stephen King books, he had no fear throwing the N-word around in his novels. So I would assume that it's in the book. I just can't remember from when I read it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of another blaxploitation movie that I thought was more progressive than it ended up being, is Blackula, which I enjoyed watching recently in preparation for this episode.
I love how much of Blackula you got to see. I was like, I'm just like ready to watch it now.
It really, I picked it out, especially because this documentary made it look so interesting.
This was also another moment where all of the talking heads, you could see like how much reverence everyone had for Blackula. They were like, it was this amazing actor that we all idolized and this really incredible director and the first black Dracula. Like everyone was super fucking pumped to talk about Blackula.
And it has good reason. I was thinking in my mind, blaxploitation, this movie is going to be awful and it's going to be cheesy and stupid. It was very entertaining.
You watched it.
I watched the whole thing. It was wonderful, and it's short. It's like an hour and a half. But the thing that surprised me in the first, like the second segment, there's always in horror movies, there's like the introductory segment that kind of cuts, and then it's main titles, and then we're back to reality.
Oh, for sure.
So the back to reality scene is this interracial gay couple that's basically antiquing their interior designers, and they find this coffin in a home that they buy, and happens to be Blackula's coffin.
Wow, love that.
Which I was like, oh, this is like 1972. This movie's almost 50 years old. And there's an interracial gay couple, but then the F word gets thrown around a bunch of times, and they say they all look alike, and they die early, and no one cares that the gay characters are dead, and just
you
all
were
these.
texting us when that happened. You were like, it was good, surprisingly homophobic.
It was funny. I was like, I'm so excited to watch. I think I texted you that first. I was like, so excited to watch Blackula, and I was like 5 minutes in, I'm loving Blackula. This is such a surprise. And then 40 minutes later, I was like, I'm watching Blackula.
I'm still watching.
Yeah.
Blackula.
But I will say William Marshall is great as Mamuwalde, the title character. He fought to have a backstory for this character more than just a vampire. And it's the first black vampire to appear on film, which challenged the stereotype of pale vampires, that there was something that could be done with this trope. But one of the things I think that the film that Horror Noir pointed out that was so interesting was this production company, AIP, or American International Pictures, that kind of fostered a lot of these blaxploitation movies under the production or the leadership of Samuel Arkoff. And Samuel Arkoff was kind of known for this particular formula that utilizes his name as an acronym, and it represents action, revolution, killing, oratory, fantasy, and fornication. Those are all the subjects that he wanted to include in movies that he thought would get people into the
He was
the
like,
seats.
"You want to know what my interests are? Let me lay them out for you."
It was just
Make an acronym.
It was really weird, but all those things are evident in Blackula.
Sure.
Especially to have William Marshall, this very deep voice, strong presence on screen, playing this title character.
Really commanding actor,
Yes.
from what I saw.
Yeah, you felt sympathetic for him, and he's the bad guy. So it's just a really interesting crossover of generations and genres, and I actually really liked it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually watched one today that I wanted to get into the genre because, like I said earlier, this is kind of the part of the documentary I knew the least about going into it. And I watched Sugar Hill from 1974, starring Marky Bay as Diane Sugar Hill. So that's the main character's name.
Oh, okay.
But it kind of went into all the tropes that they were talking about, the mysticism. It was about Marky Bay's boyfriend being killed at the beginning of the movie by this gang, and she goes to somebody who does voodoo, who kind of, she sells her soul, and she gets this kind of zombie army to kind of kill all the people that killed her boyfriend. It was entertaining. It was entertaining as hell. I did look it up right after watching it, though. It was a white director and a white writer of this movie, and you could sense it. Just based on some of the dialogue that was given. What's also interesting with these older movies, as entertaining as they are, you can tell the budget is as low as it possibly can be.
For sure.
Because there's no, let's get another one of those shots for safety. There's nothing there. It's like, let's take one shot. If you get it, you get it. If we don't, either we're cutting it out or we're going to try to leave it in and kind of manipulate it the best we can to make it work. And that was definitely really noticeable while watching Sugar Hill. But I enjoyed myself watching through it. Yeah.
Sweet. So if in the last year you've been exposed to blaxploitation via Dolomite Is My Name, you might be interested in watching like Blackula or Sugar Hill to get into it.
Absolutely.
Because doesn't Dolomite like go to AIP to get his movie produced?
I think he might. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I didn't make the connection, but
yeah. Cool. Okay.
You remember details from Dolomite As My Name?
Kate loved
It
Dolomite.
was one of my top 5 of 2019.
It was one of your top 5 of 2019?
It was.
She's a big Eddie
You
Murphy
want to argue
fan.
about it right now?
No.
I think he does.
I mean, we can,
Okay,
though.
later.
Honestly, yeah, we got a car ride.
on the ride home.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So following the blaxploitation era, we saw the 80s really brought some new tropes to the stage for us, because this is the infusion of Reagan's America, and I loved how they used that term in the documentary, how they
really spat that one out.
Yes, they did. But the vilification of black people during the 1980s under the leadership of Ronald Reagan allowed that to infuse the black horror genre, infuse the horror genre in general. We have this whole new understanding of where, and this is so interesting because we see it reflecting today in our political leaders talking about the fear of the suburbs, or suburbs are afraid of all these people infusing into their neighborhood, or you're going to lose the suburb. Well, that was a real horror trope back in the 80s that they ended up exploiting in a lot of the films we saw. But then into the 90s and 2000s, there's this renaissance, right? There's a new dedication to realism where the tropes are now becoming that we're introducing social commentary into the films. That definitely a big piece that we see Jordan Peele pulling on today. There's a social consciousness, and there's this retribution where black filmmakers are coming back and kind of reclaiming the horror genre as their own. And we see a morphing of the final girl trope that we saw burst onto screen with people like Jamie Lee Curtis in the Halloween series. Now that's being played by Jada Pinkett Smith. 25th. So there's not only are women transitioning in black horror from voodoo priestesses, they're now becoming the sole survivors and these strong characters to stick with and trust throughout the movie. We also see, as Sam mentioned earlier with Snoop, we see an infusion of hip hop. Not only just hip hop actors, or we're bringing hip hop musicians into the movies. I think they mentioned
Busta Rhymes is in
Busta
one.
Rhymes, LL Cool J.
Cool J's in Halloween H2O. Yeah.
He's also in Deep Blue Sea, and he survives that movie too. So that was
Deep
pretty
Blue Sea
cool.
horror?
Fuck yeah!
He hates the shark movies.
Shark movies are terrifying.
But I just when Sam got 8, that was crazy. I love that show. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to give a brief. They mentioned Carol Clover in their definition of the final girl, but the actual definition from her book is a female who is the sole survivor of the group of people usually used, who are chased by a villain and who gets a final confrontation with the villain, whether she kills him herself or she is saved at the last minute by someone else, such as a police officer, and who has such a privilege, quote unquote, as to become of her implied superior moral authority. So, for example, she's the one who refuses sex, drugs, and other such behaviors, unlike her friends, much to their demise. So this is kind of
which is a stupid trope.
Stupid trope. Explain.
Stupid trope.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying though, like, why does it have to be this like crystalline, like virginity, clean complex in order for you to survive not getting hacked apart? You know what I'm saying? Like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no,
I'm glad that we did it for the culture. I'm just saying that the trope in itself is no good.
Yeah, I totally agree with it, and that's kind of why I appreciated when like Scream came out, because Scream talked about these tropes so openly, so everybody could hear it. And like after seeing that movie, you go back and watch a bunch of older movies, and you're like, yeah, all this shit's the same. It's the exact same thing all the way through the movie. But I think Scream, because after Scream, a lot of movies start kind of being a little bit more self-aware in what they're trying to do. And you don't get many of those pre, what is it, like 96, something like that. I don't know when Scream came out, but somewhere around there.
Yeah, the spoofy horror movie. Far and Food Chain before then. I'm trying to think.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. Is horror similar to the whodunit genre? I'm thinking of like if you read an Agatha Christie book or you read 2 Agatha Christie books, you can kind of predict the way that she's going to solve the rest of these crimes. And her books have shaped a whole decades worth of history of the whodunit genre. But is horror kind of the same way, where once you kind of run through a trope, you have to emerge to find something else? Otherwise, it's going to become so stale that your audience is going to dissipate.
Yeah, if you watch a movie the way I watch a movie, that you're going to be able to pick out this person's done. They're not going to make it to the end. They're just kind of following the template as they kind of go along, which is why I love a movie that catches you off guard so much.
Yeah, and it's why Jordan Peele and Ari Aster are now household names in horror, because they've completely flipped it on its head.
They do something different with it. But I do think horror kind of goes through these cycles where you're going to see kind of the same thing for a little while because it was successful. When Paranormal Activity came out, the found footage movies were super popular. Well, Blair Witch was first. Yes, sure. Absolutely. But I think they dove more into it after Paranormal Activity. Maybe
it became a moneymaker.
It just seemed more realistic to have the camera set up around the house versus like the entire time you're holding the thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and Blair Witch also was a sleeper hit. It wasn't huge when it first came out.
True.
It took a long time to get the cult following that it has today, where Paranormal Activity was a weekend box office winner immediately. Yeah. But I think that's an interesting thing to think about is the cyclical nature of horror, and specifically black horror. That's what this documentary was so good at explaining, was that, because they even talked about Blackenstein, and how Blackenstein was basically just trying to maximize on the success of Blackula, but then it wasn't as successful. So that totally changed the way that they were deciding going through, and AIP had to change how it was going to make movies. But that brings us all the way up to our present day, the 2010s, which really is defined briefly in the movie because as Sam mentioned, is kind of bookended by Get Out. But really, there's a maturity that's kind of now forming in the 2010s and into our current era, which I've seen described multiple times now as the new golden age of black horror.
Well,
so
we love doing that.
Huh?
Every age that we live in is the golden age.
And I think that's because you bring up a great point, Don, because hearing TV now is saying that TV's in its golden age. Well, half the TV that people are watching, half the TV that's nominated for Emmys is not even on TV.
Right.
So it's not really TV's golden age. But I like this description because I think it's kind of a rush to judgment, even though Get Out totally changed the game and brought black horror to a critical audience. You know, four-time Oscar winner. It seems premature to do this, but the whole point is the trope is changing from black characters being a source of fear to now the heroes and the heroines of these stories. And they're the character that lasts the whole thing. They're the character that we identify with. Even though I loved the commentary that Jordan Peele gave at the end of this movie saying, I didn't write this for white
for
people.
black audiences, yeah.
And I think that was an interesting thing to hear him say, because white audiences loved this movie, and you know that the Academy will only support a black character if they're represented in some sort of demeaning character role, whether they're a maid or whatnot. So to see that not only did this movie get appreciated by the Academy, that Daniel Kaluuya got a specific nomination for his performance, his first, but then they kind of reading about this a little bit more, referencing movies as specifically referencing 2020 as a huge revitalization of the black horror genre, kicking things off with Get Out, but then moving to Us. You all joke, but Ma was actually mentioned in this article I read with Octavia Spencer. Just released this week as of this recording is Bad Hair on Hulu, and Annabellum, which has been long delayed, which is now available.
Right.
And then, of course, Nia DaCosta's upcoming remake of Candyman, which is executive produced by Jordan Peele. So I guess the question here is the 2010s the golden era of the new golden era of black horror, or is Jordan Peele just kind of reshaping the way people are deciding to make movies?
You'd be asking the wrong person. I don't know.
Oh. It's an opinion question.
I'm gonna be all right, a bit contrarian and just say,
Please.
I maybe think that the case is being overstated just a bit, simply because it's like, one, to me, horror is one of those genres like westerns or musicals. It's not like a drama or a comedy. You know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, yes, it may be the golden age, if you will, of black horror, but it is still like a horror movie and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not a lot of horror movies that you have to, I think you go searching for that niche more than that niche comes and, you know, pulls you in a lot of the time, just to be frank. So, like, they had the example of Jada Pinkett with, you know, her being the first, you know, integral pioneering black final girl. You know what I'm saying? Wonderful. She was also in Tales of the Crypt, the sequel. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of these movies on this list was like, you would have to go around the corner, then in the basement of the video store to find this dusty VHS. I mean, horror in general is kind of like, maybe I'm hating a little bit, but I'm like, you know, it's horror. You know what I mean? So, I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that, because a lot of these movies, like, I had heard of, like, some of these 90s ones, but it's not like movies that I'd go and, like, talk to people about. And it's not like movies that other people have heard of. Like, who's heard of Bones? Very few people have heard of Bones. I think the reason we're kind of seeing this build in the 2010s is because Get Out made money.
Facts.
In every single trailer of a new horror movie that stars a black actor or actress, it's going to say, from producer Jordan Peele or from producers of Get Out. It's going to add that in there to kind of give it that boost.
And that little bit of like serotonin is released in everybody's brain, and they're like, oh, I have to see that one.
I think it's true that they also pointed out after the Jada Pinkett movie that like Queen of the Dam came out, and then you had the Predator movie. So yeah, these things do happen to precipitate once you see that makes money. But let's keep it like 110,000 though. At the same time, it's like that was kind of what I was trying to wrap my head around, and I was like, why do I feel this way about horror? You know what I mean? Like, what specifically? And I'm like, because there are like many 45-second videos that make their way to the internet every other week, showing like literal murders by the police. You know what I'm saying? It is very hard for a film to do anything with that. You know what I'm saying? When that is the atmosphere that in which you're watching these films. So I think that all around film, not just horror or anything like that, is kind of in a battle conceptually with what we record ourselves. You know what I'm saying? And what we watch. And I think that for me, horror-wise, you know, none of that shit competes. Like, there are things that literally on the internet I will not watch. Versus, like, yeah, I'll dabble in this, you know, silly possessed dog movie. Sure.
Yeah, nothing's going to be scarier there than
nothing's
going to
be scarier than the finality of watching something like that. You know, I almost think, like, I was like, you know, sitting here listening, and I was like, man, what would be like a scary movie for me? I think it would be like if Mr. Smith Goes to Washington had a black person in it, but instead he just died on the Senate floor and didn't actually change anything. And then they were just like, forget it. Because it's like getting lost in like the bureaucracy and the institutionalism of America as a black person, I think is something that's way more relatable and scary than any, like, you know, possessed pimp movie.
All right.
A mouthful of bees.
I'm going to add in here, copyright TM. We're writing that movie. The time sensitive stamp is on that. Produced by Time Sensitive. We'll write that movie.
So you think that this progression into politically motivated horror movies is the only pivot that the genre can make to remain relevant?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, but that's going to happen naturally because to me, like, as you're talking about these movies and the progression of, you know, more black horror and on the release schedules and stuff like that, it's because there's more black producers. It's because there's more independent black wealth that is financing these movies. You're not having to, you know, basically hit up Startgarden and say, will you please accept my idea? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to do that right now. I think that one of the things that didn't get covered in this that, I mean, probably would have went off track, but it would have been interesting to kind of see a side note, is that the rise of hip-hop as a corporate brand also helped give rise to other independent media by African Americans, because hip-hop is making literal, if not trillions yet, definitely multiple billions for lots of people. So that energy gets converted over. I mean, you're having these people right next to film executives. It's going to naturally progress that way. And once you have that independent money, like in Atlanta, an independent black film capital, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to get these stories that are more intuitive, your Queens and Slims, you know what I mean? Like Selma's, all these different movies that actually take people from black spaces like Howard and say, think for yourself. So yeah, you're going to get more, I guess, politically driven, but I wouldn't even tag it with political. I would say it's personal.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's actually personal. Yeah.
So there's an infusion of drama into, you know, horror and drama are going to kind of merge into one.
Absolutely. Okay. Because drama is like, to me, I mean, comedy and drama, right? The duality of real life. But that's bringing it closer to something that's relatable and actually fucking scary. You know what I'm saying? Like, versus, because, like, yeah, none of those movies are scary. You know what I mean? Like, outside of how they get the cinematography and the editing and the jump cuts, which I am like, that doesn't count. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you freak me out by popping out at me, that doesn't count.
Sam says this all the time.
Every time we do a horror movie, I feel like a jump scare is the cheapest way to scare me.
But it's also very effective. But it also doesn't count.
It doesn't count, no.
But do you think there will always be a place then for horror in the sense that, like, you can watch that and that's the boogeyman that can't get you, that sense of escapism, whereas like reality can be scary and it can fuck you, but maybe I can watch, if I want to watch something scary, this is the thing that can't.
You described a movie earlier as entertaining, and I think that that's where that lane goes into.
Yeah.
Where
It'll
it's
always
just like,
be entertaining.
It'll be entertaining.
Right.
But as far as, like, you know, actually serving the purpose of the stated genre, horrifying, horror, you know, scaring me.
Something
even.
will always be scarier.
Yeah, it'll always be something scarier, but at the same time, like, you know, as you start to again get more and more people who are living these experiences, we can tell the stories better from our perspective and get more into the nooks and crannies of that story to kind of make it both, make it entertaining and make it scary. So I think that you'll get the horror movies that are simply entertaining, the blockbuster ones that you're going to escape from. I think you'll have reality horror as well. You know what I'm saying? I think that it'll be a wider spectrum. More representation means that, I think, more gradients on the spectrum.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, we can only hope, and
Yeah.
this movie does a great job of outlining all those things for us. Was there any part of the movie that you loved, whether that's a line or a segment that they mentioned specifically? Just to give you an example, for me, it was I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but listening to Jordan Peele pull back the curtains behind his genius, which I didn't want to think this because I was like, this movie is really only existing because Jordan Peele agreed to do it. I understand that, and he's the focus, but just listening to a filmmaker talk, listening to you talk, Dom, has been one of those things. It's like, oh, wow, I don't think that way. I will never think that way. I cannot comprehend thinking that way. So to hear someone kind of just peel back their artistic process, to me, is so intriguing. So hearing him say that and talk about how I never thought Chris was supposed to die at the end of the movie.
When
in
he
his
was
original
talking about
script.
kind of reshaping that ending after his first screenings. Yeah.
And just his honesty about the filmmaking process. He's always been that way. I can listen to him on YouTube for hours just because he's so well spoken in how he addresses those pieces, but he's also very honest about them. He's not going to shy away from something because it's not PR to say that his movie was supposed to do this or his movie was intended for this audience. I like that reality that he brings to the table, and I still think he's putting out the best work. So listening to him talk was one of the cool parts for me.
Very cool.
Don, was there anything that stood out for you?
Keith David. No, I'm serious. Like, sitting here and then watching him and Tony Todd, man. And then, okay, so that's the thing, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be like, change my life horrifying. It was just nice watching Tony Todd just show his face. It's so fucking frustrating to see somebody so, like, so much gravity. He's like a Denzel in that way. Like, he can just be on screen and just do shit with his face, and you're just like, I just want to watch him. I don't even care what he says. You know what I'm saying?
It's
like
his voice for me.
Yeah, and just like that shit. So yeah, it was cool watching just like the old clips of Candyman. But again, like, I watched Candyman. I did a rewatch Candyman because Candyman was actually scary to me when I was like younger. I remember seeing it in a drive-through. I think that what's outside of like, you know, whatever you would call the political or, you know, the current events and weaving that into horror to make it scary, using things from regular life like a mirror, that will like freaks me out because I'm like, you can't avoid a mirror. You're gonna have
always
a mirror
there
all the time. Or like, you know, like a story set on a bridge, you're like, I'm freaked out about a bridge. So that, like, you know, that element of Candyman always freaked me out. But I rewatched it before I was even knowing I was going to be on this podcast or anything about this. And I was like, this movie's not all that fucking great. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, for real though, it is what it is. It's like, you take what you can get from it, which is simply Tony Todd and Virginia Madison. She's cool. Yeah. But like fucking Tony Todd, man, like he knows how to move through those. I also really enjoyed that they mentioned the sequels because the sequels are pretty good.
There was no movie that was too like unpopular or small for them to mention. They were like, we're talking about it all. Yeah.
This was on HBO Fiesta one time, and I'm telling you, you should take it and watch. Yeah. Where do I find this? I don't know.
Dom, are you excited about the remake of Candyman?
No,
it'll
be fine. I mean, I'll watch it. You know. It's a remake. But
did you hear it was produced by Jordan Peele?
Oh, wait. I don't know, man. It's like, it's a remake for one. We do this all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It'll be fine. It'll be good.
And I'm sure Tony Todd will have a tiny ass cameo.
He's gotta.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Even though he should get a bigger part.
They superimpose his face on a bee and one of the bees.
Dude, at this point, if he wasn't in that movie, Tony Todd's niece would have helped him set up a Twitter for the Twitter rant to leak to the Hollywood Reporter. That would have been happened by now.
Yeah.
And a petition.
Oh, for sure, a petition.
Yeah.
Kate, what stood out to you in this doc?
So my favorite moment is so weird because it was around a movie that I had never heard of, a director I had never heard of, but they were talking about Eve's Bayou in like the 90s segment, Casey Lemons. And it was kind of like when people are talking about Tony Todd in this and they're talking heads, or when they're talking about Candyman, it was like the reverence with which everyone was talking about that movie like moved me in this weird way. I was like, everyone has this like these stars in their eyes when they're talking about how beautiful Eve's Bayou is, and I was like, I don't know anything about this, but I'm feeling like this has to go to the top of my list to watch soon. Yeah. And it's worth noting too, Casey Lemons recently directed one of Ian's favorites, Cynthia Erivo, in Harriet. So also like a very current director putting out recognizable work. Yeah.
I thought it was funny that's her claim to fame is this horror movie, and she's kind of one of the only, I mean, now not only, but at the time, one of the only Black female horror directors. And here she is putting out a movie that puts Cynthia Erivo in the Oscar chair.
Yeah.
You know, I love that's 20 years later, that career is still there.
Yeah, and it was just it was a moment in it where I really noticed technically kind of what was happening to them. There was a shift in music while they were talking about Eve's Bayou that was like a little bit more romantic, dreamlike, and all of the clips they're showing, it was obviously more gothic, dreamlike, romance type of film. So they just like there was this big shift in tone when everyone was talking about that, and I just like felt I was like so convinced by everyone that I needed to see it.
Those tonal shifts made
for sure
things very clear that you should know this.
Yeah, because you know they would speed over, you know, whatever, scream Blackula scream, but then things would really slow down when something was worth noting, and everyone would get to comment on it, and they really did a great job of like noting importance and like iconic films.
Yeah. Sam, what about you? What stood out here, or what's one of your favorite segments or lines?
I'm going to go with Dom here and say Keith David and Ken Foray. They were my favorite part of this entire documentary. The two men have 434 acting credits between them. Oh my God. Which is incredible.
That's almost as many as Nicolas Cage.
Almost as
From
many.
2018, yeah.
But they just had so much joy chatting with each other.
Yeah.
Like even during the end credits when they're singing Monster Mash together was amazing to me. I just really enjoyed hearing those two kind of go back and forth and talking. And they've been acting for about the same amount of time. They both kind of got started. Ken with Dawn of the Dead, and then Keith with The Thing.
Yeah.
I enjoyed when they were talking about that. The parts that really stuck out to me that Keith said, and I went back to figure out exactly what he said. It was about the trope with the black character dying first. He said, once, if we're not dead in the first 15 minutes, we're certainly dead by the last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So that was one of his lines. And then the amount of excitement in his voice when talking about The Thing was fantastic. He's like, I lived to the very end. I survived. Like he was shocked by the end of that, because we did have other people that were in there. They're like, they kept flipping pages to see how long they lasted in this movie. So those parts really stuck out to me.
Okay.
They had great chemistry. They
really
were just
did.
really fun to watch.
Give us a Keith David and Ken Foray movie.
Yes. all the pairings that they did. Let's use this as a great transition into the technical side of it. And Dom, this is where I expect you to blow my mind here. But these pairings, I've never seen something like this done before, where you, not just the talking heads, because there were some of those, you know, the interview style profile image captured, which were great. But sitting two people from seemingly opposite ends of this genre, sitting down and talking about their passion and love for this was one of the most engaging things I've seen in a long time.
And literally watching a movie together.
Yes.
You're like sharing something intimate.
And they were playing into the black people talk during a movie trope.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a fantastic technical element there.
They were?
What?
Playing into the black people talk during the movie trope?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a great interview with the director, Xavier Bergen, talking about how the whole point of this was to show that there is a conversation that goes on, and people want to have a conversation about the movies they're watching. He also said that it's because black and brown people, I think I'm using his quote directly, black and brown people comprise 25% of the film audience, yet they represent such a small portion of what's actually on the screen. So putting them together into these pairings to talk about the movies that they contributed to symbolizes the fact that they're in the theater watching themselves on screen. And it's more of a representation argument than anything that he was trying to make, but he wanted it to be engaging and share that there. Would you have gone about it that way in putting two people together?
I mean, I wouldn't have gone about it anyway, because I wouldn't have made a black horror documentary. Okay. But I do like the way that they ended up setting people up. I thought that, you know, it gets boring just watching talking heads.
Yeah.
Too informational. So I like the conversational side of it or whatever. And yeah, I thought that their pairings were really interesting. They had Paula Jai Parker, and then
that was my favorite pairing with William Crane, the director of Blackula.
I thought that they really meshed well. I thought that the chemistry was really cool between those two, and between like Ken and Keith, and then what were the other pairs that they had?
Ernest and Virginia. No,
he was. They were two dudes. It was a dude that directed. He had an obnoxious fedora on, and it was it was him. And great movie though. The guy that directed Tales from the Hood.
Yeah.
Yep, and I thought they were a great pair too. So yeah, I liked seeing the pairs up together. I wonder how they kind of made the decision of who was going to be individual. That kind of came up when I was watching.
Yeah. My thought was just like, oh, this person had some weird schedule stuff. Yeah. I loved the Paula J. Parker, though, because that was a moment where you really got to see like a young duck getting to hear about like stories from the past. And I thought that framed William Crane really well, where he got to tell these like really iconic moments in history, even though Paula J. Parker is 50 years old.
I know. That's what I was just about to
for applause.
say.
Seriously. She's like literally not that much younger than him. But you got to see her, again, that like sparkle in her eye of getting to hear like stories of old and like garner all of this wisdom from him. And he was incredibly humble and sweet and just
and he was
totally
really young going through all of that as the director of this movie in the 70s.
Yeah, I thought that was a great pairing. And then the other pairings brought different things. Like you can just tell that they put a lot of thought into who they put together, because you had this great like familial thing with Keith and Ken. You got this thing where you got to frame William Crane really well. You had some other really great ones where it was just quiet conversation. Kind of. There was one where it was two people, I can't even remember, sitting shoulder to shoulder, just kind of like whispering to each other. So you got this great sort of like multi-level moments with each pairing.
It was very intimate.
Yeah.
And even though that sometimes that intimacy can overshadow the personality of these people as themselves, it never did. Because there were some, just even how they sat in the theater chair showed off, their posture showed off their personality. And not just what they were speaking about, but all those nonverbal clues. We talked about this already, but I love the decades approach at a time, because sometimes a movie that's covering a span or a long period of time can elect to go, I think you mentioned this earlier, to elect to go by project or let this project stand alone. And you kind of give a deference to the project when the project is really a product of what era it was in. Right. And that was one of my favorite parts that they chose to do, was match this to the politics of the time, match this to what was going on in the country, to see the juxtaposition of Night of the Living Dead next to the Selma riots, and the bridge crossing in Selma, both black and white, and to compare those two things together was another eye-popping image for me.
This is all about placing this genre in historical context.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the whole premise.
And I loved that choice. Loved that choice, because I mean, we could have done like, hey, some of the greats are, and have a conversation about X, right. and that could have gotten a little bit too tangential. It wouldn't have been as concise and concrete as this movie ended up being. So I loved that approach. I just thought it framed everything super well. And then to come in with the attention grabbing of Jordan Peele on board, talking, I think he's one of the first or second person that's shown on the film. Great, bring in an audience that you wouldn't usually have. They're now interested, and let them sit and learn something throughout the rest of it. That's where I.
But he got to do his from home.
He sure did.
For sure he did.
Sure did, in front of that beautiful marble fireplace.
He definitely phoned it in a little bit, but that's
I hope he's sitting in his own home theater. He's like, oh, it's in a theater. That's cute.
That counts.
So is there any way we could get? You know what? Actually, no. We'll come to you. That's fine.
Yeah.
So I just have a couple questions here that we do the segment where we talk about anything that we have that's a reigning question or something that we want to use to expose.
Yeah, anything you were left kind of thinking, we just pose to each other.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is kind of a fun question for us to think about is, who's a filmmaker or an actor that you'd like to see take on a horror film? And I kind of talked with Kate and Sam about this before we started, but one for me that is just standing out, just because she seems to be the it woman in Hollywood right now, having just won her 4th Emmy and has a movie that's coming out in a couple of months that is already getting a lot of Oscar contention. She might be a female Best Director nominee, is Regina King. I think she'd be terrifying in something. I thought the role that she won her Oscar for in If Beale Street Could Talk, I thought was very toned down from what I like to see her as, especially these characters that she's doing on TV that are a lot more in your face. I would be terrified if she was, like a theater teacher, a theater coach that was like also killing off her students at the same time. Like I can just see her going super dark with it.
She's got the chops. I mean, she's terrifying as Marcy Cuba Gooding Jr.'s nagging wife and Jerry Maguire. She's terrifying there.
I part of me really wants to, because I really appreciated the trajectory of her career, that it's kind of gone from, comedy, I guess you could say. I mean, the first image I remember seeing her is from Daddy Daycare, the wife in Daddy Daycare, which is such a random thing. But to now see her as this bona fide Hollywood star that has now all these awards to her name, I'd love to see how she can cultivate that and twist it just a little bit to throw people off the scent and say that she's going to come out and do this incredible horror role. I'd love to see it. And she could direct it too. That'd be cool. I'd love to see it.
Very cool. Any
Any other people that stood out to any of you that you'd like to see in a horror movie?
My thoughts with horror movies is it's usually those are coming out parties for actors or actresses.
Okay.
So usually what will happen is they start their career with a horror movie. You'll see that with a lot of white actresses as well. So I don't know if I have somebody that I'd really want to see, just because I don't think I'd see them doing it, because it is because the budgets are much lower. You can kind of do anything you want with it. But like Jennifer Lawrence got her start doing horror. Mary Elizabeth Winstead did like Final Destination 3. So I want to see the next up and coming black actors or actresses doing some awesome horror stuff and getting the stories told that way, rather than just trying to pick somebody that already has a big name, has something going on for them, and trying to get into it. That's changed a little bit. Like we've had Lupita Nyong'o, who has an Oscar and went and did Jordan Peele's horror movie.
And Little Monsters.
And Little Monsters, which was more of a horror comedy.
Yeah.
But I want to see new people up and coming.
Okay.
That's my big thing for horror.
Okay. Dom, anyone that stands out to you as someone that you'd like to see take the plunge into the horror genre?
Honestly, 3 directors that I would want to see do a horror movie.
Ooh, okay.
Be either Christopher Nolan, PTA, or Errol Morris.
Interesting. Now, what about Paul Thomas Anderson to you?
Oh, fuck yeah,
screams
dude.
horror.
Dude, okay, The Master.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, if you had dude from Get Out in that movie, or like doing like something, because that's existential horror.
Yeah.
Like that like he does good existential dread. Even in like Punch Drunk Love, there's a nice healthy streak of existential dread. I love that.
I'd say Phantom Thread has some horror elements to it as well.
True.
Yeah, more than you'd expect.
Yeah.
Especially with Leslie Manville's character. She's terrifying.
He would nail it.
So that's what I'm saying. Like something where you know that the director has a really good eye, because the thing is, it's like horror, as much as I was like, okay, the visual tricks are cheap, you can still paint like using lines and planes and stuff. You can still hypnotize and make someone scared. I like that feeling, and so the idea of me getting caught in like Robert Elswit's photography, and then it just like, I don't know, freaking me out. That would be really cool. Errol Morris, if you've ever, I mean, the guy has literally solved crimes in his documentary, so like he could reconstruct a whole crime scene and make it like convincing. And then Christopher Nolan, they would give him the budget he could make the like, I want to see a if we had like a 28 Days Later but made by him.
Oh, okay.
Like who come on.
For $300 million.
It's getting hot in here.
That would be dope, dude.
So what other questions stand out from the movie, or what other questions you want to pose to the group? Anything that comes to mind?
I have an easy one.
Okay.
Of all of the movies mentioned that we've all said there's like plenty we hadn't seen, what sort of ended up on the top of your like, I have to see this next list?
For me, it was The Girl with All the Gifts.
Yeah.
Just
they were
because
really convincing with that.
I've wanted to watch that for a long time, and then to actually see that it fits into this genre so significantly, that the way, again, we talked about the deference they give to some of these titles, to have a movie that has Glenn Close in the movie, barely mentioned her name in this discussion of this movie over a considerable period of time, makes me think that, wow, there is something really special about this. And I've been timid to watch it because it looked super violent. Zombie movies I can tend to separate a little bit from, but this one for some reason seems a little bit more realistic than others. But now I really, really want to see it. Yeah.
Dom?
Ganja and Hess.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about that.
Ganja and Hess look cool. I mean, because I love like, I know I'd mentioned the last time we had spoke like Charles Burnett and like those kind of like just Linklater, man, the Linklater-esque, and so like the idea of a horror movie infusing that, and Bill Gunn is like an into fucking intellectual, so you know that his shit is gonna be like very high concept. I was really interested by that, and it's also on Criterion, so I was like, that's an easy get.
Very nice.
Do you have a Criterion subscription?
Bad
He's giving
Come on. Who did you invite here? Next question. Let's go.
I would never pay for that.
What?
Josh.
Ian is the cheapest man I know.
Ian is
He would never pay for that.
frugal.
Come on.
I'd never pay for that.
Frugal. Sam.
I had two.
Yeah.
One because it
Well,
was
I asked for one, so please choose.
Oh god. Well, the one I won't talk about is The Thing because I talked about it on a previous episode.
Okay.
But the other one is Attack the Block. John Boyega's. I don't even think that
Alien movie.
Yeah, it
I
was like
guess?
an alien movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'd heard of it before. I've been interested in seeing it. I remember Bong Joon-ho said something really, really cool about it a while back, and it's been one that I've been meaning to see. I just have never gotten around to it. Now I want to see it even more.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kate.
Sweet. I mentioned Eve's Bayou. I was really intrigued by the imagery they showed there, but I think even more so intrigued by what people said about it. I really want to watch Tales from the Hood. Yeah.
I was interested by the anthology concept.
Yeah, I was too.
Yeah.
They had a lot of interesting things to say about the power of short stories with a wraparound story and how that really served its ultimate purpose. And it just looked like a really interesting like amalgamation of effects and social issue. Like I just couldn't quite wrap my head around it, which I think ultimately I was like, okay, I just need to watch it. Yeah.
There's also something super attractive about a kid that's being abused by his father that basically breaks him like a voodoo doll. Was I the only one who noticed that part?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, sure.
Like
yeah.
I want to see that. I think it'd be cool. So Sam, why don't you hit us with some numbers now in respect to this movie? Now, there's not a lot of data here, but what were you able to find?
Yeah, since it went in kind of the streaming way, we don't have quite as many reviews on this one, but IMDb audience score of 7.7 out of 10 out of 900 ratings. Rotten Tomatoes, we have 100% critic rating on that. Kind of makes sense. It's critics talking about movies. How do you see that as a bad movie? And then an 83% audience score, and it was certified fresh.
Yeah. So great reviews there. But when we talk about the under the radarness of this movie, again, Kate it's been on your mind for 6 months, but I think I have to reiterate why a documentary about the historical depictions of underrepresented groups featuring members of said underrepresented groups that premiered on a novelty streaming platform. Why would that be considered under the radar?
No reason.
Yeah. I do want to say that listening to Xavier Bergen talk that this film was never going to happen until Jordan Peele attached to it. And
sense.
they basically said when he won the Oscar, it changed the whole trajectory of the movie because this was going to happen before Get Out was even a thing.
Oh, okay.
And there was, they had found some sort of backing, but not enough to make it. And then Jordan Peele wins the Oscar. He's the first African American to win screenplay or best original screenplay at the Oscars. And then all the interest and the money started flooding in. AMC is backing this because AMC is part of Shudder or owns Shudder. So all of that became all of a sudden relevant and available for them to do. So again, if you haven't seen it, it's available for free on Shudder. You can just Google watch horror noir and it'll come up. It's really great. You can watch it on Amazon Prime too.
Yeah, it's kind of why though it feels at times like a Get Out infomercial.
Yeah.
Although I don't know anybody who hasn't seen Get Out at this point. I feel like most people have already seen the movie, but it did feel at times like an advertisement for this movie, which makes sense since so much money went into it because of Get Out and Jordan Peele.
See, and part of me is just wondering that Get Out is just as significant as we think it is. That's the only thing I can come to think about. I know, Dom, you kind of challenged us earlier, but part of me is thinking the way that they talk about, various movies, they talk about Night of the Living Dead, they talked about East Bayou. These were huge monumental shifts of movies in this genre, and then it makes sense that Get Out would be one of those. I see it as being that. I just don't think there's any way to downplay its significance, whether that's 2 years out from the movie being released or 15 years from now or 50 years from now.
I don't think that there's any way to downplay Get Out's significance either. I think that when it comes to saying that that this is part of the wave, that's where I get skeptical because I'm like, what wave?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But that movie in particular, not only because of its commercial success, but because of the points that it actually addressed in the movie, and also getting, I don't know, the spectrum of people to go see it because everybody was going to go see Get Out. That's like the huge thing about it. You know what I mean? That I think it is super seminal. It's not like my favorite movie in the world and shit, but I do love that movie a lot.
What do you think contributed to the fact that Us was so, not technically not bad? Again, this is hard. We have to put under the radarness into a scale here. But in terms of Get Out success to Us's success, there's always the sophomore slump. But Us is not a bad movie, but it garnered almost, I think, nearly not even half the box office that Get Out had. And you've got this huge director supposedly reshaping and directing this genre. Why do you think there was such a fall off there?
I think because, one, it's like all the pressure was on like Jordan Peele to follow up, right? So second slice of pizza syndrome, like it's not, it's never going to live up to that, especially when you're hyping it up with those expectations. But also the movie itself, I remember watching it and being like, oh, this is meandering like a bit. You know what I mean? Like towards the third act when it got into like the whole like underground society, I was like, all right, I think this is cool. But it is like meandering just a bit for me. So I felt that in the theater as I was watching it. But I think honestly, it just has to do with like, you put pressure on somebody. You're like, this is the new wave. This is the king of, you know what I mean? This is the king of new horror. Like, how can anybody live up to that?
And it was almost immediate.
Immediately. You know what I mean? And he did come out with it like less than 2 years after.
Yeah, it was quick.
Or something. It was really quick. So,
but I mean, his the industry putting that title on him was almost immediate. He didn't even have a chance to give us more than one image or more than one film.
Well, when you're the only horse running.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Well, putting it back into our context of the show in horror noir, a history of black horror, please.
Dom, our final question of the show is always, would you recommend this movie?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Great.
I love there's such a build up to that.
Sometimes we say another sentence or two, but it's fine.
It's a pandemic. I mean, go watch whatever. I mean, I'm saying, but yeah, no, this is a good, informative movie. Again, I think that what it did well was it took what I feel like is a pretty sparse subject and made it an appropriate length, but it also was detailed to the point where it didn't feel like, why am I here?
Yeah.
Like it did offer new details and ways of looking at movies, because I'm not like a movie snob. I love watching shitty movies all the time, but it's not like I'm watching them to watch them analytically a lot of the time. So the fact that these scholars actually took time to break these down and said where they were in the context of history, I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
And had you heard of this movie before we asked you about it? Okay. No. Okay. I wasn't sure if this even registered in horror circles.
I hadn't heard of Shudder before this. I had to go get a Shudder
free trial.
Yeah, I had to get a Shudder free trial. And then you know what? I guess I apparently had one already. I don't know how that happened. I cussed out my computer for like 3 minutes. I was like, I've never had a Shudder trial. What are you doing? And
I hope you think of us now every time you get spammed in your email with Shudder bullshit.
I'm gonna think of you every month when I'm charged for $4.99.
You can bill me.
Okay. Kate, would you recommend Horror Noir: History of Black Horror?
Yeah, I totally would. The only negative I could possibly find is if like you're a black horror fan, this would probably be really tedious and boring. Like if this is already something you're into, watching clips and hearing people give like a brief synopsis of movies you already know and watch would be like bullshit. And then something we mentioned super briefly, my like only gripe really is sometimes I feel like it did move really fast and maybe there was too much emphasis put on timeline and historical context. There were points where I wanted to know more about like a director. Like they talked about Oscar Micheaux and like his significance within the time period, but I was like, but wait, where did he grow up? Like I'm such a like personal and like heart forward person. I'm like, where did he grow up and what are his influences? Like I wanted to know more about each project and each director and kind of get a feel for them, where we kind of are briskly taken through this timeline. But
do you read the descriptions at museums and stuff too?
Yeah, that's like what you're supposed to do, right? Yeah, but I would totally recommend.
Okay. Yeah, I would too. I think this was just the most fun, engaging lesson I've been taught in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to echo the words of Tananarive Due again, the professor that I quoted throughout the episode. She said, horror is a genre where we can take real life trauma and unpack it in a way that both informs an audience that doesn't know and helps an audience that does know feel seen and validated. And to me, she and the other academics in the panel, which were, the celebrities and the filmmakers were fun and great, and I love that part. But to have an academic context around this movie and to shape it that way really cemented the significance of this. I can sit and talk to people talking about their own work for a long time, but great, what significance does it have? This showed that the academic community supports the study of this genre, and there's more to be done here. So I have to say yes, completely. So short, so fun.
There's no excuse not to watch it.
Yeah, no excuse. Sam?
Yeah, I
not that we said there's no excuse.
No excuse. Yeah, I absolutely recommend this one. Yeah, it's not very long. I kind of wish it was longer. I wish there was more to it, a little more meat on it. But like you said, Dom, there's not a whole lot of movies that are there to be talked about, which makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And I will say there is a little more gore in it than I actually expected. So even if you are a horror fan and you're like, I don't want to waste this amount of time and I don't get to see any actual horror movies, they show enough clips and they show actually a little bit of gore in this. And I was surprised. I was surprised by that kind of aspect of including it in, but it is Shudder. I have heard of Shudder before. I did not have
real
a
movie fan over here.
But I would expect that people who have a Shudder account are here for the gore. They're here to see all these things. Otherwise, they wouldn't watch these Shudder original shitty TV shows that they put out there.
There's original TV put out by Shudder?
By Shudder, yeah.
Oh, I bet that's so shitty.
It's like Sci-Fi Channel, but in a streaming form.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. All right, so that kind of wraps us up here. Thank you everyone for listening to Time Sensitive and our discussion of Xavier Bergen's Horror Noire: A History of Black Horror.
We'd like to extend a special thank you to Dom Damron for joining us in this episode. Be on the lookout for his upcoming project.
I told you not to say
Sorry,
that.
I'll say it again. Thank you so much for joining us, Dom. Seriously, it was awesome.
You're welcome.
You bring a level. You bring a level of finesse to this episode that I don't think we could ever possibly achieve on our own.
Not possible.
Yes.
Not possible.
And I haven't been out of the house in 55 days. I still have finesse. Isn't
So
that
you're
dope?
welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome for getting out of the house.
Yeah.
Right.
This
the
was
fresh air.
symbiotic. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
We've had a pretty awesome Freaky Film Festival so far this year, but if you've missed any of our scary episodes from the past month, give them a listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever podcasts are sold.
There's no better time than this spooky season to interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at TS Movie Pod. Tell us what you thought of this episode, what you want to hear next year. Obviously, like I said, I was mining this one last winter or whatever. We want to hear from you.
Thank you for listening. We are Time Sensitive. I'm Sam.
I'm Ian.
And I'm Kate.
Take care.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I'm Swanson, host of the TV Tuners podcast. Every week on TV Tuners, me and my co-hosts, Keo Rain,
Swanson, I need water.
and Stairmaster, review the latest in TV, discuss news, trailers, and even find time to play some fun games. Right now, we're working overtime to cram as much TV knowledge into our brains as possible. Isn't that right, guys?
Swanson, we've been here for 24 hours. We need to get out of here.
Not until you answer who Norm is.
He's Fraser's brother.
Wrong. You get the shock. Check out TV Tunes, available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or any of the podcatchers of your choice.